Hi, everyone. Just hang tight while we figure out this technical difficulty.
Want to turn on the camera? Yeah. All right. Can everybody see and hear us?
Yep, we can hear you. I can hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I see some familiar faces here today, but for those of you who do not know me, my name is Jeremy Feinberg, and today I will present an overview of the conditional waiver of waste discharge requirements for waste discharges resulting from timber harvest and vegetation management activities in the Lahontan region, also known as the 2024 Timber Waiver. This presentation is intended to provide guidance and support for project implementers working on timber harvest and vegetation management projects in the Lahontan region. I'm joined by my colleagues in the Forestry Dredge and Fill Unit, who will support this presentation and who I will introduce shortly. Before continuing further, I want to inform all attendees and participants present at this presentation that the meeting chat, the presentation, the meeting chat, and public questions and comments will be recorded for the benefit of interested persons who are not able to attend today's workshop. And your questions and discussions may likely benefit others' improved understanding. Please sign in to the outreach presentation on the next slide, and we encourage you to subscribe to our email list when you sign in. We will present the QR code to sign in after we wrap up. The purpose of today's presentation is threefold: to identify new timber waiver conditions which support accelerated pace and scale for timber harvest and vegetation management projects, discuss water quality protection measures required by the 2024 Lahontan Timber Waiver, and answer technical questions regarding permit requirements and receive comments from interested persons. The presentation I will share with you today will follow the agenda provided in the public notice and invitation to today's outreach event. For those of you who are online, you can scan this QR code using your phone or any device with a camera, and it will take you to a form where you can sign into today's meeting, and it will provide an option to subscribe to our email list that's specific to timber harvest and veg management updates at the Lahontan Water Board. So I'll leave this up for a minute so folks can get out their phones, and it'll take you right to the form. And if you prefer to not use your phone, we have a link to this form in the meeting chat. You can click on that link, it'll take you to the form. Before continuing further, I'd like to acknowledge the significant contributions of Adam Henriquez. Adam led the Lahontan Water Board's work in revising the 2014 Timber Waiver and developing the 2024 Lahontan Timber Waiver. I feel fortunate to have supported this effort and grateful to have worked closely with Adam during the permit revision process. Adam continues to serve the public interest by protecting environmental resources in his new role at the California Tahoe Conservancy. It's also important to acknowledge the contributions of the FDF unit staff: Jen Callahan, Megan Walsh, Kathleen Bindle, and Brian Talmadge, former supervisor Trevor Miller, and former compliance and planning division manager Andrew Jensen. Trevor now leads the regulatory and enforcement unit. Andrew is currently enjoying his well-deserved retirement. Brian Talmadge now supervises the Forestry Dredge and Fill unit, and Mary Fiore Wagner leads the compliance and planning division in the division manager role. Some of you may have already met Jen, Megan, Brian, or Kathleen during the course of project inspections or site visits. Jen and Kathleen serve as environmental scientists, Megan Walsh as an entomologist. We're also joined today by our newest member of the FDF unit, Luque, Water Resources Control Engineer, who's based in Southern California and attending remotely. And I would also like to acknowledge that our board chair, Dr. Amy Horn, is attending today's workshop remotely. Next slide, please. As indicated in the public notice, today's presentation will adhere to the following outline. We'll discuss applicability, revisions to support pace and scale, new water quality protection measures. We have a section dedicated to prescribed fire. We'll provide a brief overview of the revised requirements. And we'll talk about the revised monitoring and reporting requirements, which apply to all categories. And we'll touch on changes to category-specific requirements. Presentation will be followed by an opportunity for interested persons to ask questions. You may type your questions into the meeting chat at any time or speak during the question periods. We'll also accept comments relevant to the 2024 Timber Waiver during the question and answer period at the end of the presentation. Additionally, we will provide an opportunity to ask questions at the end of each section. If you're attending remotely, please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. The content of this presentation is intended for professionals and implementers working in forestry. As such, we expect that questions and comments will be professional in both tone and content. Next slide, please. The 2024 Timber Waiver is a general permit applicable to timber harvest and vegetation management activities throughout the Lahontan region. It was adopted by the Lahontan Water Board via unanimous vote on August 20, 2024. It applies to projects enrolled after this date, as well as all projects previously enrolled under prior iterations of the Lahontan Timber Waiver. By expanding the scope of applicability to include these existing projects, we hope to support increased pace and scale by allowing dischargers to utilize the increased flexibility of the 2024 Timber Waiver for existing projects. Next slide, please. We've revised the 2024 Timber Waiver language to move from paragraphs to a bullet point format to ensure that the permit conditions are clear and easily understood. In some cases, the and, or, except for language made for language that was difficult to interpret and difficult to translate to clear direction for folks working on the ground. And we hope that the revised language, as well as the line and section numbering, address this issue. Clarifying permit language serves two purposes: protecting water quality and reducing the likelihood that implementers will need to remobilize personnel and equipment to the site to address water quality concerns. We're keenly aware of limited resources available to perform vegetation management projects, and we want to see resources move forward to start the next projects and not return to the last project to fix issues that could have been prevented with effective site stabilization work. We've also moved sections of the 2024 Timber Waiver to help focus the reader's attention on the permit requirements. These format changes include a shift to the numbered lines that I mentioned earlier to clarify the requirements and applicable sub-requirements. We've also changed some terms. As an example, under the 2014 Timber Waiver, complete applications would be granted a notice of receipt. We've changed this language to be a notice of applicability to avoid confusion, as our general inbox at the water boards generates an auto reply which states, "We have received your email." And this could be interpreted as a notice of receipt. Some additional new terms in the 2024 Timber Waiver include specific definitions for different types of watercourse crossings, including skid trail watercourse crossings, temporary watercourse crossings, and permanent crossings. These crossing types pose different water quality risks and have specific requirements. If you have questions regarding the applicability or structure of the 2024 Timber Waiver, or a general question, let's answer those now. Hearing none, you can move forward. In this section of the presentation, I'll provide details about the 2024 Timber Waiver with the focus on modifications from the 2014 Timber Waiver, which support the accelerated pace and scale of forest health, vegetation management, and community protection work. This slide provides an overview of some of the 2024 Timber Waiver conditions intended to support pace and scale. Expanding the eligibility of Category 1 defensible space activities is the single largest revision to the 2024 Timber Waiver. We've also expanded Categories 2 and 3 to allow a greater range of activities and we anticipate that these may be used by project implementers. Category 4 limitations have been streamlined and simplified by removing some of the previous limitations regarding skid trail watercourse crossings on Class 3 watercourses. And Category 4 now allows the expanded use of prescribed fire. We also anticipate the need for post-fire timber harvest, and we've allowed expedited enrollment for Categories 4 and 6 in the post-fire environment. This option will allow work on the ground to begin while applicants prepare a project application. Next slide, please. Category 1 got a lot bigger in the 2024 Timber Waiver. New project types allowed under Category 1 apply to defensible space, community protection, and the preservation of human life. Newly eligible projects include work in a 1,000-foot fence zone around private property lines, structures, or facilities. So that's all the wildland urban interface work that many of today's attendees are working so hard to perform. Category 1 also now includes work performed under the Tahoe Program Timberland Environmental Impact Report. CAL FIRE 1038 exemptions eligible for Category 1 coverage. As are projects to reduce roadside fuel loading within 300 feet of evacuation routes, and projects to reduce fuel loading within 300 feet of flammable liquid tanks or facilities. Taken together, these new eligibility criteria should allow a significant amount of defensible space work to proceed without preparing an application and support the increased pace and scale of these types of critical projects. I will discuss the conditions for Category 1 shortly, but it's worth mentioning now that Category 1 allows skid trail watercourse crossings on Class 3 watercourses. The photo in this slide was classified as a Class 3 watercourse by a qualified professional. It's located at approximately 8,000 feet in elevation in the Lake Tahoe Basin, and this photo was taken in mid-August. How many folks attending today's event would classify this as a Class 3? And you don't need to answer. We'll leave that as a rhetorical question. I want to be clear that this watercourse pictured here is not a Class 3. If you feel inclined to classify a watercourse that looks like this as a Class 3, we should spend some time together in the field and work to get on the same page. Next slide, please. The permit language modifications to Category 2 are minor when compared to the revisions to Category 1, but Category 2 now allows projects performed with equipment only without hand crew support. This might include masticator projects or similar, which use low impact equipment with less than 10 psi ground pressure. Next slide, please. Categories 1 and 2 share many similar conditions, which are identified as category-specific prohibitions. These prohibitions include road construction or reconstruction, Class 1 or 2 skid trail watercourse crossings, equipment use in wet areas or SEZs, burn piles must not occupy more than 10% of a treatment acre within WBBZs. And Category 2 requires that skid trail watercourse crossings be constructed without any grading or excavation. Regarding equipment use, these prohibitions apply to travel in applicable areas, and equipment operators may reach into areas with an equipment use prohibition. If you're working on a Category 1 or 2 project and you have questions about these conditions or other conditions, reach out and we can work with you to clarify the requirements as needed. Next slide, please. Category 3 was previously written to address wildfires only. The eligibility criteria and conditions have been revised to allow all emergency types, and critical time periods applicable to coverage have been extended. The applicable timelines are relative to the end of an emergency, which is the date wildfire has been declared controlled, or the end of a non-fire emergency. These timelines overlap, and I will work to clarify them here. In summary, you can start work without any notification and notify us within 7 days of starting work. Remember, these are for emergency projects. Applicants have 60 days to secure coverage and 120 days to start work, and 365 days to finish work under this category. If an emergency ends and more than 60 days pass without notification that your project intends to use Category 3, your project is no longer eligible. We want to be flexible and accommodating, but we'll also adhere to these timelines regarding eligibility. If you think you may need to respond to an emergency and would like to use Category 3 to do so, please reach out earlier rather than later. Please also expect our team to inspect your Category 3 project to develop and align expectations regarding water quality protection measures. The notification requirements for this category require that applicants identify water quality protection measures, and we expect to see these protection measures applied appropriately and implemented effectively. It's my sincere hope that we can reduce the need for this category by performing effective prevention work under Categories 1 and 2. Next slide, please. Under Category 4, Category 4 under the 2024 Timber Waiver was revised to clarify requirements, focus efforts, and allow more beneficial work. Road widening is now allowed except in WBBZs, higher extreme erosion hazard rating areas, or unstable areas. Skid trail watercourse crossings of Class 1 and 2 watercourses are allowed over snow. We have removed the skid trail watercourse crossing requirements for 4x4 truck passage, the quarter-mile requirement, and the requirement that Class 3 watercourses be dry at the time of the crossing use. We do expect the number of skid trail watercourse crossings. We do expect that the number of skid trail watercourse crossings will be kept to a feasible minimum in accordance with professional standards and best practices. Broadcast burning is allowed in 100-year floodplains in most watersheds in the Lahontan region, except for the 100-year floodplains of the Lake Tahoe, Truckee River, and Little Truckee River hydrologic units. Activities which qualify for Categories 1, 2, or 3 coverage can commence prior to the receipt of your Notice of Applicability, your NOA. And lastly, applicants may propose to limit monitoring to active and recently completed units. We will review these requests and will require that project maps clearly identify individual units. Water Board staff will evaluate the stabilization outcomes of each unit before suspending the monitoring and reporting requirements for that unit. If conditions on the ground begin to deteriorate after monitoring is suspended, please expect to resume monitoring. Next slide, please. Expedited enrollment for emergency post-fire timber salvage provides an option to initiate activities before a complete application is received. This option applies to Categories 4 and 6. I want to mention briefly now and discuss the requirements in greater detail towards the end of the presentation. Expedited enrollment requires submittal of a notification form prior to initiating work. That would be Attachment S. And it will require additional monitoring and reporting due to the sensitive nature of the post-fire environment. I'd like to take a moment to discuss our framework for expedited enrollment because it mainly came from the Central Valley's 2017 Timber WDR. Oh, could you please mute? This 2017 Timber WDR included identification requirements for significant existing and potential erosion sites, abbreviated. We had similar CPs requirements during the development of the 2024 Timber Waiver, but decided to remove the dedicated form used to document and prioritize individual CPs. This was largely based on public comment. The language of the prior versions of the Lahontan Timber Waiver, as well as the 2024 Timber Waiver, requires that waste discharges and threatened discharges be stabilized. And we believe this covers the on-the-ground requirements. So we've done away with the form, right? It never made it into the final version of the order. What does that mean for our project implementers? As a project implementer, you should know where the site, where potential CP sites are within your project area. As a project implementer, should you fix these sites within your project area? Yes, of course. As a project implementer, should you prioritize these sites based on existing or potential threat to water quality? Yes, please. As a project implementer performing required monitoring and reporting, should you document the performance of these sites and associated corrective action within your project area? That's a definite yes. Next slide, please. So the notification requirements for expedited enrollment are identified on attachment S. It requires some pretty basic project information, such as the landowner contact, your CAL FIRE enrollment information, if applicable, and some information about your activity area. Size, the highest and lowest elevation, the approximate center, latitude and longitude, and the classification of watercourses present in the activity area. We'd also like to see where your activity area is relative to some kind of landmark. And please be aware that once we receive your notification that you intend to use expedited enrollment, we may reach out to schedule a site inspection as part of the application review. Next slide, please. Because expedited enrollment projects are initiated without water board review of an application in sensitive environments, we prohibit specific activities prior to an accepted application to reduce the risk of waste discharge. These prohibitions apply to Category 6, and they include constructions of landings within a water body buffer zone, equipment use in SEZs in 100-year floodplains of specific watersheds, which are the Lake Tahoe, Truckee River, and Little Truckee River hydrologic units, and work within or affecting known landslides, unstable areas, areas of high or extreme erosion hazard rating, overflow channels, flood-prone areas, and riparian areas, or aquatic or wetland habitat. All of this is stated on attachment S, the notification form, so it will be easy to find. And with that, I'd like to move to the next slide and invite questions from anyone who has a question regarding pace and scale and how we've modified the 2024 Timber Waiver to accelerate, to support accelerated pace and scale. If you have questions, let's answer those now.
Any questions in the room?
Yeah, I have a general one. I know some things have changed. We had an assembly bill passed that's, changing the forest fire prevention exemption from CAL FIRE to the forest resilience exemption. So that's going to be the 1038.3 CAL FIRE exemption. So in theory, it would flow under the Category 1 timber waiver category. And one of the unique things with that is it's probably what we're planning on leaning on at Truckee Fire to increase our pace and scale. So moving towards more biomass utilization, more removal of biomass for energy, logs to mills within reason where we can, do less rearrangement, less burning. So trying to do it all for the right reasons. But one of those challenges for us is that we're not working on state or federal lands, and roads and landings are a complete challenge. And the last eligibility criteria here of category 1 conditions, F127, would basically take a perfectly good THP exemption provided by CAL FIRE and then be moving us into like a category 5 where we'd have to be going back into a monitoring piece, because we have projects where like they wouldn't be feasible without construction of temporary roads and landings for up to 2 miles under this new exemption the state's approving. So just curious to understand if you guys were tracking that new forest resilience exemption, the update of those roads, and what type of flexibility or options we have if we get into a location, we're trying to do the right work. And the only way we can do it is with some temporary road construction and landing construction, knowing that we're constrained, right? For us to do a 500-acre project, sometimes we're combining 100 private landowners together. So there's already a monumental effort going into like right of entry agreements and getting 100 couples that own a land to all, have 200 collective opinions to agree with us. And so we're already juggling so much. And it's like, how do we make this work? What flow do we go through to make this timber waiver work with us?
I think it's just a conflict on what CAL FIRE does allow in their exemptions.
Yeah.
So that forest resiliency exemption, you can construct temporary road. It says, no more than 2 miles of road per ownership in a single planting watershed. And then they kind of give you some restrictions for exemptions over 80 acres. You can go up to 600 feet, and all temporary roads have to be basically fully abated by, the end of operations. Like you got to close them out. And so
are there some seasonal stabilization requirements in there as well?
Yeah, you can. If you're making temporary roads, you have to abate them, and we put chip on them and, close them out fully. But I just think it's just slightly conflicting with that requirement and that condition where, we're going to use a CAL FIRE exemption. CAL FIRE says we could build some temporary roads as long as we close them out. And then the waiver here is saying activities must not include construction or reconstruction of temporary or permanent roads. And so, sorry we didn't catch that one earlier, but I think some clarification there would help some of the practitioners out there using these exemptions.
So that's an excellent question. So my first thought, I would probably need to dive a little deeper to give you an answer I could like fully stand behind. But my initial thought is it may be appropriate to kind of break these up into the by activity type and cover the area of road construction under notifying. It would probably be a category 6 if you're building a temporary road, because category 4 is projects that rely on existing roads. But that would limit those monitoring and reporting requirements to what we're really concerned about, which is the condition and the performance of that temporary road during use and after stabilization and abandonment. And so that would significantly limit the scope of additional monitoring and reporting.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, it makes sense in the category 2 and other things where you don't want any road construction. So yeah, however you guys can think of how to make that clear for us, so we don't feel like by pulling a permit and then constructing a temporary road that we know that we're going to abandon and close out. Yeah, how can we make that work? I think that's great.
Okay. Yeah, and we can follow up on this and do something that makes sense. And that there's a lot of little places for flexibility in the timber waiver, but roads are definitely one place where we wanted to keep the construction of new roads, including temporary roads, under notifying categories. Hopefully that helps. At least a little.
Yeah. I mean, if the reporting is not too, difficult to get through, then I guess it's something that can be worked through, but yeah.
Yeah. And we can, that would be my initial thought there, was to kind of piecemeal those so that your monitoring and reporting focuses on the high threat activities. And in this case, that sounds like it would be the construction of temporary road and the abandonment.
Yeah, and I would look at the new rule set that the Board of Forestry just put out, because they have protection measures in here for water courses with the construction of temporary roads. in the rule set. So you can't be within a certain distance of a class 3 or class 2, 1 water course, stuff like that. So I think the Board of Forestry did a pretty good job of writing this piece of legislation here, and the rule set is designed to avoid those impacts to water courses. So I think the intent is there already with just what we have to do to file this permit with the state.
Indeed. Okay, yeah, let's follow up and do a deep dive. Cool. At a later date, later time.
Perfect.
Maybe at the end of the meeting today, we can dive into the language and see what we can do to move these sorts of projects forward for you.
Perfect.
Great point, though. Thanks for bringing that up.
Do we have any other questions from folks online?
Nothing in the chat and no hand raised at the moment.
All right, hearing none. We'll move along to next section, new water quality protection requirements. In this section of the presentation, I'll provide details about the water quality protection requirements of the 2024 Timber Waiver, and we're going to focus on what's changed from the previous iteration. New general conditions are intended to protect water quality and support the expanded non-notifying coverage. Highlights include new standards for skid trail watercourse crossing construction and stabilization, incorporating standards for road and permanent watercourse crossing construction or reconstruction, water quality protection measures required in WVPZs, and field verification prior to application submittal. General Condition 14 is new and was revised numerous times during the Timber Waiver comment periods to address public comments. Since we now allow skid trail watercourse crossings on Class 3 watercourses on Category 1 and 2 projects, we wanted to have standards for the use, construction, and stabilization of skid trail watercourse crossings. To do this in a manner consistent with category-specific conditions, there are several sub-conditions under D14.1 to clarify mapping requirements consistent with different categories. Both start with those mapping requirements. If your skid trails cross a Class 1 or Class 2 watercourse, these need to be mapped and described in a complete application. This applies to categories 5 and 6 only during a typical work season and category 4 over snow. Mapping of possible Class 3 skid trail watercourse crossings should be done in a complete application, but line 14.122 provides a mechanism to add Class 3 crossings via the amendment process, which I will cover later in the presentation. By mapping possible crossing locations, we're providing a mechanism for flexibility in the field and reducing the need to document amendments during implementation. When do you need to install some kind of structure to cross a watercourse with equipment? The 14.2 and 3 provide crossing triggers for crossing construction. Generally speaking, those are don't tear up the bed and bank, the bed bank and channel by rutting, destabilization, over steepening, and don't get your tracks or tires wet. If you can meet both of these conditions without building a crossing structure, none is required. Another condition that we've clarified is that skid trails must not capture watercourse flow, which is was an expectation of the prior iterations of the Lahontan Timber Waiver, which we have clarified here. Next slide, please. The quality of stabilization work after crossing abandonment has a significant impact on water quality. New requirements formalize effective practices as permit conditions. Those new requirements are that you must remove unconsolidated sediment from the watercourse that's been mobilized into the watercourse during the crossing use. Permittees are required to restore the alignment and the grade of the bed and banks. Widening is allowed consistent with forest practice rules. Crossing structure materials must not enter waters or be placed in a location where they might enter waters. You'll need to stabilize banks using appropriate materials, which will not enter waters. And establish hydrologic disconnection between the skid trail and the watercourse using water breaks or other structures. Next slide, please. As permanent features on the landscape, roads and permanent watercourse crossings on roads represent an ongoing threat to water quality in the event of road or crossing failure. Effective standards for the construction or reconstruction of roads greatly reduces this risk. The two documents that contain road construction standards are the Forest Practice Rules, Article 12, and Technical Rule Addendum Number 5, and the Handbook for Forest, Ranch, and Rural Roads, prepared by the Pacific Watershed Associates, available online free of charge. This is a useful resource which provides cautionary tales and examples of effective work. If neither of these standards works for your project, applicants may also describe proposed water quality protection measures for roads and permanent crossings in a complete application. Next slide, please. General Condition 17 formalizes best practices for work in WBBZs. If complying with this new condition represents a significant amount of new work for you, we should probably talk offline. These new requirements include no storage of petroleum products, pesticides, or lubricants in a WBBZ. No refueling or lubricating equipment, with the exception of pumps used to control prescribed fire, which required secondary containment during refueling and lubrication. This was an ad from a public comment, which made a lot of sense. You're required to monitor equipment for leaks, repair or remove leaking equipment as soon as practicable. Keep a spill kit on site. It must be effective at containing materials used during the subject project. Clean up any spilled liquid waste and impacted soil. Dispose of the liquid and the impacted soil properly. And lastly, soils within WBBZs must be operable. And we also clarify that soils outside of WBBZs must not be saturated. Next slide, please. General Condition 24 provides specific direction to the general expectation that applicants perform a field visit to each subject site as they prepare a timber waiver application for categories 4, 5, and 6. This condition is meant to support timely application review and effective water quality protection. The qualified professional must verify watercourse classification and possible skid trail crossing locations, which helps determine the appropriate category of coverage and WBBZ widths for each watercourse. If watercourse classification is performed incorrectly, we may determine that your project as proposed is not eligible for a particular category, and in some instances, project implementers would need to suspend or limit activities while a new application for a higher category of coverage is prepared, submitted, and accepted before all planned activities can resume. We also require that a qualified professional verify proposed landing locations, unstable areas, wetlands, meadows, springs, or wet areas. If you're operating in a wetland or wet area and you're not aware of this, you may need to suspend or limit activities while a new application for a higher category of coverage is prepared, submitted, and accepted. We're also require that qualified professionals verify the location and classification of all water bodies in the activity area. And we believe that clarifying the requirements for field verification will help projects move forward smoothly and without the need to stop or avoid sensitive areas. Next slide, please. If you have questions regarding the new water quality protection requirements in the 2024 Timber Waiver, let's answer those now. You guys got any questions? Any questions from folks online?
And in the chat, no hands.
Hearing none, moving forward. We've worked to expand the scope of prescribed fire allowed under the 2024 Timber Waiver. I've dedicated this section to discussing how different prescribed fire activities in various settings fit in the 2024 timber waiver categories. The scope of prescribed fire regulation under the 2024 timber waiver is limited to areas near waters, meaning WBBZs, 100-year floodplains, and SEZs. When using prescribed fire outside of these defined areas, we expect project implementers to use their best professional judgment. The revised 2024 timber waiver conditions for broadcast burning are intended to support the expanded use of prescribed fire, consistent with the state of California's goal to increase the use of beneficial fire to build forest and community resilience statewide. Notable general conditions include the requirement to prevent waste discharge to waters, to ensure the control lines don't concentrate runoff. Broadcast burns cannot be ignited within 25 feet of waters, but a broadcast burn may back down towards the water body. And there are no burn piles allowed within 100-year floodplains. However, broadcast burns within 100-year floodplains are allowed under category 4 and 6. Burn piles are prohibited to keep burn pile materials from becoming flood debris during a flood event. Category 1 and 2 conditions for prescribed fire are a bit more restrictive because these are non-notifying categories. So we're looking at smaller burn piles. These burn piles must be less than 10 feet in diameter, and they must not occupy more than 10% of a treatment acre within a WBBZ. Category 1 and 2 also do not allow prescribed fire in SEZs or any 100-year floodplain. Next slide, please. Notifying categories, which are 4, 5, and 6, allow a greater range of prescribed fire activities across more settings. These apply to pile burning and broadcast burning. Category 4 allows WBBZ burn piles up to 25 feet in diameter and up to 30% of a treatment acre within the WBBZ. Broadcast burning within 100-year floodplains, except in specified watersheds, which are the Lake Tahoe, Truckee River, and Little Truckee River hydrologic units, which have waste discharge prohibitions for their respective 100-year floodplains. And category 6, similar to category 4, it's the 25 foot, 30%. And burn piles and broadcast burning are allowed within SEZs. We have a specific attachment for that if you're working in the Tahoe Basin. And broadcast burning within 100-year floodplains of the Lake Tahoe, Truckee River, or Little Truckee River hydrologic units is allowed under category 6. So if your project involves pile burning near waters, what would that look like? Let's use a hypothetical example of burn piles near a class 2 water course with slopes around 40%. The WBBZ width would be 75 feet, and no piles should be placed within 25 feet of waters, leaving a 50-foot wide strip of WBBZ where piles can be placed to cure for later burning. At 75 feet wide, 1 acre of WBBZ would be 580 feet in length, assuming the entire width of the WBBZ is treated. The footprint of 150-foot wide, the footprint of 125-foot diameter burn pile is about 490 square feet, and 30% of 1 acre is 13,000 square feet, give or take. Therefore, within this 580-foot long, 50-foot wide area, these notifying categories would be allowed to construct up to 26 burn piles, each of them up to 25 feet in diameter, which is a lot of pile coverage. If operationally feasible, we prefer that burn piles be constructed further away from waters and outside of WBBZs when site conditions allow. But we recognize the need for WBBZ fuel treatment and the fact that much of this material needs to be removed from WBBZs has no value as timber. Burn piles constructed far from waters outside of WBBZs, SEZs, and 100-year floodplains are not regulated under the 2024 Timber Waiver and therefore don't have size restrictions that we impose. Some implementers prefer burning large to very large piles and burn during the winter due to accessibility with snow on the ground and the ease of monitoring fewer piles while burning. Please carefully assess the potential hazards when identifying burn pile locations. Problematic things I've seen in the past include very large piles constructed directly under high voltage electrical transmission lines. Luckily, this was not in the Lahontan region. None of us want to inform you that a massive burn pile needs to be moved. So I'll ask you now to please spend time planning your burn pile placement and communicate this plan with your field crews. If you have any questions regarding the new requirements for prescribed fire in the 2024 Timber Waiver, let's answer those now. Hearing none, moving forward. Moving on to a water board staple. Monitoring and reporting requirements. Most of the monitoring and reporting performed by project implementers applies to notifying categories of the 2024 Timber Waiver. However, this section will focus on the requirements which apply to all categories and some specific requirements for non-notifying categories. We've added a new section, Section E, which consolidates general monitoring and reporting requirements, which include discharge notification requirements, project information record keeping for non-notifying projects to be provided upon request. We've developed a new process for submitting material changes. It includes a notification form. We'll talk about that form and what it takes to change a project category, including upgrading or downgrading project to a lower category of coverage. We'll talk about documenting amendments and substantial deviations for CAL FIRE plans. Actually, I'm going to go. So I don't have a slide for substantial deviations for CAL FIRE plans. The language in the Timber Waiver indicates that it's gone through the review team, that we don't require anything additional. So I'll address that now. Moving on to unauthorized discharge requirements. What is an unauthorized discharge? Any discharge resulting from water quality protection measures that have failed or were simply not implemented would potentially qualify as an unauthorized discharge. It's better to notify us of a potential unauthorized discharge than to not notify. If we determine that the discharge is not significant and does not require corrective action, we'll let you know. The notification requirements are simple and include the date discovered, the location of the incident, recent weather, a brief description of the discharge, the nature and the extent of the discharge, a volume estimate of the amount of waste that was discharged, and planned corrective actions and a timeline for completion. This can be submitted after the initial notification. And if you're not sure what your corrective actions look like, that can be a discussion that we take up after you perform the initial notification. Photos of the source of the waste and the point of delivery to the subject water body. Useful photos with something in the photo for scale would likely be the most useful part of this submittal and help us work together to evaluate and address the issue. Regarding your plans for corrective actions as needed, please don't be shy about reaching out and using the collective experience of water board staff as a resource. Next slide, please. While Category 1 and 2 are non-notifying, the 2024 Timber Waiver requires that project implementers keep basic records and make those available to staff upon request, or upon notice, rather. The water board staff may request information on Category 1 and 2 projects, which includes the following: a written project description and purpose, a map showing the project area and location. Your skid row water course crossing locations, which should all be on Class 3 water courses, past and planned pesticide use, and the project start and end dates. So pretty basic info. Future permitting efforts will consider the outcomes of non-notifying projects and conditions on the ground at category 1 and 2 sites will inform the language of future permits. Please expect us to request this information in the next year or two in order to perform planned audits of these project types. Please also expect field presence of our team on category 1 and 2 projects. I will say here as an aside that one of the reasons we felt comfortable including 1038s in category 1 is because those rain cal trees, you can find them, reach out to the applicant and let them know that we'd like to stop by and have a look. So, we did expand category 1 quite a bit, and we want to make sure that that was a good choice and make sure that we can continue to do that moving forward. So that's the intent of these record keeping requirements, that you can expect us to be in contact and take a look at your site. Next slide, please. Moving on to material changes. Material change and amendment process is new for the 2024 timber waiver. We lump them together in a single attachment, which is attachment R. But these are two distinct processes. Let's start with material change, which requires approval of water board staff prior to implementation. One purpose of the material change form is to limit the need for revised project applications. Material changes are significant, and the new proposed activity may impact water quality. When evaluating material change notifications, water board staff will consider the additional water quality protection measures described in the notification form as compared to the proposed project changes. Here we will discuss 3 types of material changes: changed activities, the addition of activities, or changed site conditions. So changes to the project location or increase in size, project activities that require our executive officer to grant an exemption to waste discharge prohibitions, or change to a higher or lower category of coverage would be a material change. And an upgrade to a higher category of coverage, if you were category 4 and now you're going to cross class 1 or class 2 water courses, or you need to build a road, that would actually require a new application. So if you're moving up, like those application, the category 4 application doesn't request all of the relevant information for those types of activities. Another type of material change would be additions or relocations of the following activities, including winter period operations, water course crossings that would require additional management practices to avoid water quality impacts, or the addition or relocation of roads, landings, or skid trails into WBBZ, SEZ, or 100-year floodplain. And the third type would be changing site conditions, which include increase in the physical extent of any previously mapped water bodies. Next slide, please. Downgrading projects. To help support the accelerated pace and scale of ongoing projects, all previously enrolled projects are subject to the revised requirements of the 2024 timber waiver. Because of this, some previously enrolled projects may qualify for enrollment under a lower category of coverage based on the new category-specific eligibility criteria and conditions of the 2024 timber waiver. To request a change to a lower category of coverage for your project, if you think it is applicable, please perform the following actions. Review the general conditions, eligibility criteria, and category-specific conditions for the requested category of coverage in the new 2024 timber waiver. Prepare and submit the material change and amendment form and indicate which category of coverage you're requesting. Describe the specific project activities and site settings that meet the requirements of the requested category. And in your email submittal, please indicate your availability to accompany water board staff on a field inspection to the subject site. Attachment R is the mechanism for submitting a request to downgrade an existing project. Some Category 4 projects enrolled under previous iterations of the timber waiver would likely qualify for Category 1 coverage under the 2024 timber waiver. And lastly, the text on this slide was copied or paraphrased from our website, and you can find this in a bit more detail there. Next slide, please. Documenting amendments. Unlike material changes, amendments can be implemented without approval of water board staff. When in doubt, please reach out. Project changes which do not rise to the level of material change must be documented as amendments using attachment R within 10 days of implementation. We ask that you submit amendments with your annual monitoring reports or upon request from water board staff. Examples of changes which qualify as amendments include adding Class 3 skid trail watercourse crossings, adding or modifying Class 1 or 2 skid trail watercourse crossings where the crossing type and water quality protection measures are described in a complete application, adding landings outside of a WBBZ, SEZ, or 100-year floodplain. Regarding the second bullet here, I'd like to provide an example. So if you have Class 2 skid trail watercourse crossings identified in a complete application as being a mix of Humboldt and Spittler crossings, each proposed structure type is identified in the application and corresponding water quality protection measures are adequately described. Flow conditions at several of these sites proposed for a Spittler crossing is very low or dry, and the applicant determines that a Humboldt crossings are more appropriate. This qualifies as an amendment because the crossing type and corresponding water quality protection measures are already described in the application, and these are simply being applied elsewhere on the project. The amendment section of attachment R should be used to document this change within 10 days of implementation. If the discharger requires a crossing structure type that is not described in the application, this would require material change submittal and corresponding approval from water board staff. Next slide, please. If you have any questions regarding the general monitoring and reporting requirements in the 2024 timber waiver, let's answer those now. No questions on downgrading. Surprised. Next slide, please. Public comments during the development of the 2024 timber waiver requested reduced monitoring and reporting requirements. We evaluated these requirements and made reductions and modifications to the monitoring and reporting program to support pace and scale, as well as focus the energy and attention of implementers on the most notable risks to water quality. I would like to introduce this section by stating my personal opinion that monitoring on its own has no water quality benefit. In order for monitoring to be worthwhile, the observations made during monitoring efforts must be used to develop and implement timely and effective corrective actions where poor outcomes are observed in the field. Ideally, any waste discharges or threatened discharges are quickly and effectively addressed, and corresponding corrective actions are documented in the monitoring report. Since we'll never be certain where corrective actions will be required, we require monitoring and reporting as laid out in the 2024 timber waiver. The purpose of monitoring and reporting is not to generate pages of checked boxes and text that someone has copied and pasted too many times. It is to identify problems, fix them, and report the outcomes. Effective monitoring and corresponding corrective actions should reduce the need to remobilize to the activity area to correct issues. Sites without any issues are always preferred, but a monitoring report that describes corrective action that has already been completed, demonstrates environmental awareness and a proactive management approach. Next slide, please. We've made the following revisions to the monitoring and reporting program for notifying categories. These include a single submittal for monitoring reports, which is July 15th. So there's no January submittal required moving forward. If you submitted monitoring reports during or before last week, thank you. There is no need to support those reports again in July. We have revised the forensic monitoring trigger, and we have added additional monitoring and reporting for expedited enrollment projects. I touched on this earlier, and I'm going to describe it in more detail shortly. And lastly, we removed the daily winter period monitoring program checklist. That was attachment E. It's blacked out on the website now. You can't even get to it. That was a daily checklist, and we determined didn't really add a lot of value. But we do still require winter. There's winter period specific monitoring, just not the daily checklist. So want to clarify that. Also, attachment P is really useful at helping you determine which monitoring and reporting is required and how that fits with your schedule for implementing your project on the ground. Forensic monitoring revisions for categories 5 and 6. Previous trigger to perform forensic monitoring required that field personnel access sites after significant precipitation events. Doing this would often mean traveling on wet roads and navigating a saturated site. Corrective actions were required. There was a high potential to cause additional problems. Rather than require this, we revised the trigger for forensic monitoring to apply to the following circumstances. Active operations are ongoing at the project site and a precipitation event produces runoff. So forensic monitoring is intended to prompt field personnel to evaluate BMP effectiveness during operations and implement any corrective actions needed while equipment is on site. This is another revision intended to reduce the likelihood of us asking you to remobilize to the site and fix problems that could have been identified and fixed earlier. Next slide, please. And lastly, I'd like to discuss the additional monitoring and reporting requirements for expedited enrollment projects. Because expedited enrollment projects are initiated without water board review of an application in sensitive environments, we require additional monitoring and reporting to reduce the risk of waste discharge. Category 4E, additional requirements include effectiveness monitoring and photo point monitoring if requested. And category 6E, additional monitoring and reporting requirements consist of photo point monitoring. And we require that you evaluate water body classifications and physical extent of water bodies during effectiveness monitoring. And this is because of the increased water yield that we typically see in the post-fire environment. It's very common to see water course classifications change in the first spring or two after a fire. So we want folks to be on the lookout for that and adjust accordingly. Next slide, please. If you have any questions regarding the category-specific monitoring and reporting requirements in the 2024 Timber Waiver, let's answer those now. Hearing none. And general questions and comments. This concludes the prepared portion of today's presentation. We welcome any additional questions and comments from interested persons at this time. If you have a question or a comment, we'd love to hear from you. And hearing none.
Well, thanks for working with all of us, I guess, which we appreciate, reaching out on specific projects and through this process and being willing to adapt, change, and make these things work for us.
Absolutely. we just got one more closing remarks slide and we can call it a day.
Does anybody else in chat? There is nothing in the chat.
All right.
One thing.
Hey, Jeremy, I just want to thank you as well. Appreciate it. Time and effort in presenting, and I learned a little bit, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. Hopefully you guys find this useful. So I'd like to thank you all we got a great question earlier today. Thank you all for your time and attention. We plan to post a recording of this presentation, as well as these slides for future reference and the benefit of those who could not attend today. You'll be able to find these on the Lahontan Timber Harvest website. We have a QR code that will direct you there. There's a second QR code that you can use to subscribe to email notifications relevant to timber harvest and vegetation management. We'll be showing those as the next slide. In closing, we'd like to thank you all for your presence and engagement. The flexibility added to the 2024 Timber Waiver is our first step to supporting the accelerated pace and scale of forest health and vegetation management projects that we all want to see underway across our forested lands. Unfortunately, we must also anticipate increased work in the post-fire environment as we all work to address the wildfire crisis. We're looking forward to working with project implementers across the region to help move your work forward and ensure positive water quality outcomes. We hope that you found this presentation useful, and we look forward to seeing you in the field. Thank you. All right.
Is that recording or?
Yeah, well, you can use for now. Yeah, it's stop recording, I think. Turn off the camera.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you all.
Take it easy.